let's see. We don't know about Mr. Graham, correct? We're deciding to proceed.
We think he might be attending late.
Okay. All right, then let's begin. Welcome all to our joint meeting with the Planning Commission, City Council, Tuesday, June 24th. Welcome here, everybody. We're looking forward to this. And Mr. Montgomery, roll call, please.
Yes. Mayor Gilman.
Here.
Council Mayor Pro Tem Lang.
Here.
Council Member Rule.
Here.
Council Member Whitman. Here. Council Member Mang.
Here.
Mr. Montgomery, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Absolutely, Mayor.
Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And may I have an approval of the agenda, please?
I'll move to approve the agenda.
Thank you. Any
second.
objections? Thank you.
Second.
Wonderful. Mr. Whitman and Ms. Mang, all good? Okay, thanks. Then we will move on to the discussion, the joint meeting discussion of the City Council and the Planning Commission. So I'm going to ask for a protocol. Should we have public comments and then start? Mr. Summers, would you recommend, or what do you suggest? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd recommend a brief introduction by Mr. Siebert as to the topics, then public comment, and then the discussion.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
First, I'm going to turn to Mr. Trent here to start off and then proceed.
Okay. Did you want me to just talk about the recommendations that we're discussing?
Yes, please. Even just briefly to say, if you don't mind, how you came to
Oh,
these,
yeah,
a little
yeah,
background,
okay.
and then Mr.
Yeah,
Siebert can
of
fill these
course.
out. And I might suggest we take them item by item potentially, but your call.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll start with, these are just items that continually come up when we're having our meetings, and just basically from the projects that we get before our body. These are typically reoccurring themes that we've heard over the years. And so what we're trying to do is get a little bit more guidelines or a little bit more direction from council on which way you guys would like to go with some of these, to just see where we can focus on in planning and potentially make recommendations to, the code or to zoning changes or whatnot, to help highlight some of these and provide some more clarity to the public. Because again, these typically come up in every conversation that we have. So the first one I'll talk about is design guidelines. Lucas can highlight some of this as far as objective design guidelines go. The general design guideline for citywide, we wanted to talk about potentially looking at a west side design guideline, because we have a downtown guideline, we have an east side guideline, but we don't have anything for the west side. And we've seen projects come before our body where we've had to make calls on what kind of design standards we'd like to see. The community provided a lot of feedback saying we want to keep it in this mission revival type of style, but we didn't really have anything in the code to outline that, or to outline that we wanted to have that as something we want to do as a community. So that's what we want to talk about with general design guidelines. And then Lucas, you want to talk about objective design standards real quick?
Yeah, and just to the chair's point, the general design guidelines, the nice thing about, can I just start kind of an overview, kind of like at the 30,000 foot level? The commission sees this as kind of a work program type of scenario where we're looking for feedback on these specific pieces. And not only that, but hey, can this commission dive into these further? Or is there potentially a pivot on some other items that maybe the council wants the commission to focus on that are maybe outside of the realm of what we're talking about here tonight? From a design guideline standpoint, the objective design standards are really what's built into one of the programs, which I think is program 15 for the housing element. So we have an obligation and a requirement through our adopted housing element through HCD that we really were supposed to finish this in 2024, but I was lucky enough to reach out to HCD and say, hey, look, we're making amazing progress on this, and we've already had several meetings on this. We're moving forward. And they said, that's fine. As long as we're seeing that you're moving forward and not stalemating, you're fine there. So what we want to do is just recognize that that kind of fits at the top of the conversation, mainly because it's an obligation that we have. The second one, tiered from that, is the general plan design guidelines citywide. And really what that's focusing on is The commission has already been handed the playbook for all the different design guidelines that we have throughout the city. And as Trent had mentioned, there is this hole on the western end of the city where there really isn't a whole lot of guidance. So really you're kind of focusing on the surrounding designs and whether or not that standard is something that the community wants to see moving forward. And obviously the commission did hear from the community in terms of, you know, a design standard that may be something the community wants to see moving forward. So I think that's something to consider and talk about. Can I keep going?
No, you're good.
Okay.
Great.
Parking. So in our conversation, it was less about parking in the downtown area. We've already got 2 parking studies that were done in 91 and 2004. And there, in both instances, it identified, oh, hey, guess what? You don't have a parking problem. You instead have a walking problem where people are wanting to park literally right next to the businesses versus those individuals that can literally walk a block, maybe 2 blocks at the most, and still get to their destination in the downtown core area. I think what this is talking about is beyond the parking situation in the downtown area and really kind of the parking situation as it relies upon its impacts both through tourism and then also those parking areas that are maybe underserved or an opportunity. I think those are kind of the focus areas that the commission was talking about. Fire hardening absolutely came. I mean, it's something that the commission has been talking about off and on for the last couple of years, but certainly with the Palisades fire has immediately been a bullseye. And recognizing with our most recent high fire map that came forward, we're recognizing that there are significant issues and challenges that we have within this community. And recognizing that and seeing that there are opportunities for us to be a part of certain things. Fire-wise communities is one of those, and we've started having those conversations and getting that information out. So we're kind of in the very beginning stages, seeing if there is that understanding to move forward and kind of do a deeper dive.
Mm-hmm.
And the noise is something that literally, to Trent's point, comes up every time a project comes forward. Noise or sound, depending on how you're having that conversation. To Bennett's point, I know we've talked about this during commission meetings in the past. The standards themselves really speak to the edges of a piece of property, and we've taken it a step further. When I say we, I mean the commission's taken it a step further to say, hey, look, let's make sure that we're addressing the areas that are potentially deeply impacted, which are the areas just outside of that, the fringe areas. And in certain circumstances, there have been specific conditions to address that.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Thank you. That's a good start.
Yep.
Can I have you elaborate a little bit on the objective design standards? The reason why, just because it's a switch on what we typically do when we're evaluating multi-family homes and multi, you know what I mean, like multifamily residents.
Yeah.
So we're kind of when it comes to affordable housing projects, what we can and can't do dictated by the state.
Yeah, the objective design standards are really held to multifamily and mixed use. And those are specifically tied to those projects which qualify as affordable housing. So it's not that it qualifies through single family or commercial. It is very much earmarked to a very specific populated land use. And the interesting thing is with the objective design standards, it is exactly as it is described. It's not that you get to make a judgment call. The judgment call lives within the standards themselves. So 2 years ago, I think we started the conversation, brought forward some discussion pieces, and then kind of scrambled, and then brought something forward again, and then threw it in the trash. And then recently, we brought forward something that has some traction. And I think we got some really good feedback from this body, this commission, to bring something back forward and potentially push the envelope as far as we can on certain aspects that have certainly come up regarding recent projects and potentially projects even in the future. So,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just a quick clarifying question. So I understand that the objective design standards are really meant for affordable housing projects and closely tied to HCD and the requirements that they have, whereas the general design guidelines are more they're more connected to our general plan and things that aren't connected to affordable housing, right? Like single-family dwellings.
Correct.
And those kinds of things.
Commercial property.
Commercial,
Commercial
yeah,
properties.
commercial properties is probably the best. Typically, it's Ojai Avenue within
Okay.
that corridor.
So, and that's where they kind of branch off, right? Okay.
Right.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you.
Why don't we, if it's okay with everybody, we'll do public comment now and then get into our first piece, if that's all right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want to do public comment for each item?
Well,
separately,
I
or-
certainly, I was going to do it basically once because I think some people want to talk about a few items at once.
Okay.
Do you have a suggestion which is per item?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Just to confine our conversation to a particular subject.
Well, I think we'll define our conversation to one subject at a time. We only have these three public comments and then anything that's online and one online. So I was going to take those, but let's keep them handy. So let me start with Bill Miley, Larry Steingold, and then Renee Roth.
Wow, first time over here. Okay, good. So my first comment has to do with the East Ojai Avenue planting guidelines. They're good, they're loose, but important because they talk about supporting businesses. The Bryant Street Circle has sidewalks completely around. The 1/3 of a mile from Ojai Avenue that meets the Bryant Circle has none. And there's no bike lanes. And no, as I understand, no directory to say which businesses are there and how to find them. It's like an ADU way at the back of a rear of a property that's hidden from public view. It needs help. Parking. In my opinion, there is definitely a need for better public parking spaces in the downtown area. More city-owned and leased parking areas. The spaces for the Ojai Libby Bowl are really crucial. At the present time, there is a vacant lot on South Signal Street adjacent to the Ojai Trail. It's been there in the past, and they've had a for sale sign on it. Perfect for access to the working entrance to Libby Bowl. I also like the idea of a multi-story parking structure behind the Bank of America, with more attendance at the Ojai Playhouse and the Ojai Hotel at the Libby Bowl. The vacant lot next to the Ojai Art Center would be perfect for city parking, but it's hugely expensive. Fire hardening. My specific interest in fuel reduction around the city, north of Shelf Road, Black and Sulphur Mountains, annual or semi-annual goat grazing, really good. We are exposed to Black and Sulphur Mountain lower fuel levels with the live oak trees. Being mostly private, my understanding is state law allows fuel reduction to occur in such properties. The Fire Safe Council has a plan for that. And noise and sound. I have a special interest in sound that intrudes into other people's spaces, produced by the sole benefit for the user. I dislike it. The sound noise ordinance fairly well specifies what levels are acceptable and not. The challenge is enforcing it. One-time measurement is not good enough. An effective way to measure it over time. I personally own a digital decibel logging meter, which will continuously measure for a week with a battery and extra power. The data gets transferred to a computer for use. Downtown sound noise by some vehicles can be very loud and disturbing. My experience in a lot of restaurants downtown, usually on occasion, there's a loud muffler going by. It's nasty and prevents hearing properly. Our new traffic officer hopefully will be enforcing state vehicle noise laws. It's an affront to the good efforts by restaurant folks to serve good.
Thank you, Mr. Miley. Larry Steingold and Renee Roth.
Ban mufflers.
Good evening.
Hi.
Let me get started. Larry Steingold. Objective design standards and existing design guidelines. Everything is fine if you could just not explain all initials and all nomenclature and make it so that any person in the city who's not necessarily real estate knowledgeable or construction knowledgeable can understand what they're reading. So you don't have to keep explaining it. Parking. I really do believe that you need a parking commission that could listen to the public, could gather the information, could do all the vetting, and then present you with something, because you're taking on a lot yourselves. And a lot of cities, even ones this size, have multiple committees to do the grunt work, so that you can analyze, they can provide you with succinct, specific terminals, termination, whatever, information, what have you. So please, a parking garage. Oh, we should have a tour around the city to see which parking spaces have been pulled out of service over the past 30, 40, 50 years, because it's my understanding through a variety of sources that there are about 50 parking spaces that could be put back into service. So we don't necessarily need more parking. And if you do provide more parking garages or more parking, it'll just mean more traffic, because now that traffic fills up. And so, and then you end up talking about paid parking and meters and enforcement. What is the goal here? Is it more parking, less traffic, more income with less traffic, more taxes with less people? What's the goal? Fire hardening, please, the Ojai Fire Committee, Council, they're up and running. They can get this done. They can start tomorrow. If you're going to put it out for bid, at least put out their proposal so somebody could do word by word, apples to apples, so we don't need to reinvent the wheel, because the city needs it today, not last week, not next month. Thank you.
Thank you,
Oh,
Mr.
oh,
Steingold.
thank you.
Renee Roth, please.
Okay, Renee Roth, Ojai. I agree with the parking committee idea. You want somebody to vet all the best decisions and do the footwork for you, the legwork, so that they can make their recommendations to you. Maybe it is about making a more walkable Ojai and having walkable art venues and meetings and places for people to visit. And that would be something that would be in the best interests of all the members of the community. So I think you really should get the parking committee going. Let's see, fire hardening. I sent an email. I've sent 2 emails in the last couple of days. I don't know. Mr. Trent didn't get it, and Mr. Gilman, or you did get?
I did get it.
Okay.
Got it today.
And Andy said he doesn't read the emails that arrived today, and I sent one today that was a really good one.
Sorry, let me just clarify. I try to read everything I can on a very busy day.
It was the best. It was the best so far. But I just wanted to say that today I really want to affirm the city's legal and moral obligation to enforce defensible space requirements for existing homes that are located in a very high fire hazard area. I happen to live in one of those right now. It was just designated very high fire hazard. I had a home hardening assessment done, blew my eyes wide open, and I went, oh my gosh, everybody needs to do this. So I looked at the Ojai Municipal Code, and guess what? Lucas Siebert adopted the California Fire Code in his update in 2022 that was enacted in 2023. And as part of the California Fire Code, Chapter 29 mandates defensible space for all structures. Some people say it's just new buildings. No, it's all structures. Can I repeat? All structures need to have a defensible space guidelines enforced. And you need to be the leader for the city of Ojai, because you are the one for mandating what's responsible in our local responsibility area. That also means that you need to adopt Ventura County Fire Standard 515. They are enforcing it right now in their brush clearance guidelines, but nobody from Ojai knows anything about it. That is really negligent on it's really terrible that nobody knows about that standard. You need to be enforcing it, and you need to help the Fire Safe Council get the grant to do the work to educate and get the word out. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Roth. You got it.
Good job. Good job.
Online, Mr. Montgomery?
Yes, Mayor. We currently have 2 raised hands.
Okay,
First from Starchild and then second from Teal.
thank you.
Starchild, you have the floor.
The Community Development Department should have as its goals promotion of affordable housing, management of road and traffic congestion, promoting the health of our community, and protecting our environment, both locally and globally. Fortunately, there's one policy action you can take today to further all these goals, and that's the elimination of parking minimums. In Ojai, we have a policy that there are more than enough parking spots for every car, but not a house for every person. 100 people sleep in the rough, many more are underhoused, and many live in fear of eviction with no access to emergency rental assistance, something the city promises but willfully neglects to provide. Minimum parking requirements make building affordable housing less affordable because developers have to build parking spaces which cost over $20,000 per space and must build less units because so much of the lot is devoted to parking. By forcing new construction to include more parking spaces than the market demands, you encourage households to have cars. After all, the parking space is there and has already been paid for. If you build it, they will come. That's one more car driven in traffic and one more car polluting the air and producing CO2. It's one less driver walking or biking, getting healthy exercise, connecting with their neighbor on the way. So what keeps Ojai from abolishing parking minimums? It's parking anxiety, the fear that a neighborhood will suffer a critical parking shortage. I can tell you this fear is overblown. Today I speak to you from Minneapolis, where parking minimums were abolished in 2021. Parking is plentiful and easier to find than in downtown Ojai on the weekend. People adapt by taking a park and ride, biking, walking, and in high demand areas, a combination of smart meters and permit-only street parking. Given the slow rate of development in Ojai, we will be able to craft tailored solutions to any areas of parking shortage, and we will continuously monitor the effect of parking mandate abolition. We need to plan for the future as well. As autonomous driving takes more market share, cars won't sit idle, parked on the street. They will work as robo-taxis, and the demand for parking will plummet. We must consider this future as we plan buildings that will be here 50 years from now. Affordable housing, reduced traffic, a healthy community, protecting your environment. You can achieve all these objectives if you have the will. It's time to act. It's time to abolish parking mandates now.
Thank you.
Next we have Teal. Teal, you have the floor. Sorry, Teal, I muted you on accident. You may unmute again.
Am I here?
Yes, you are. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Weston. Thanks everybody for being there. And I didn't know exactly where to comment as it's duplicated on this Planning Commission joint meeting as well as on the agenda with the City Council meeting about the fire hardening. So with that duplication, it seems to me that it's taking a very real issue for all of us and turning it into a copy and paste of the CAL FIRE information. And personally, the way that I see it is did I mention that I'm a county resident? So we all are living together in the valley under the same ecosystem of fire. And the county has already set up, it's ready, set, go. And the Ventura County Fire Department has an entire structure put together for us. And we've all been going on that. And it's taking a very real thing and making it into just the copy and paste, like I said. So with the echoing of the fire preparedness over and over and over again isn't putting a wire on with a staple gun. And I think the community really needs something tangible to actually go boots on the ground and help somebody staple some wire to their vents. It's pretty easy, and it's something that we're all liable, if we're property owners, to do through the county in my situation. So thank you for listening. And I'm not going to repeat this comment for the city council meeting, but I ask that this public comment be repeated in public comments for the record, because it's really an important issue, and I thank you all for being there. Take care.
Thank you.
That's all, Mayor.
Thank you. Well, I have a suggestion about starting, since there's a lot to talk about. Should we start with design guidelines and possibly go to either objective or general as a start? Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah.
And go down?
Yeah.
Can I bring up, this is what I thought came up recently that would be interesting to say when this came up when I was attending your meeting, and that was seeing things along Ojai Avenue, if we want to start there.
Yep.
Would that be an interesting way to start our discussion, to say
Yeah.
what kind of guidance you're looking for?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So I think when you think about again, these are for affordable housing, the objective design standards. So when you think about what do we want as a community when it comes to these affordable housing projects, these multifamily projects. So when you look at, if let's say we had no guidelines at all. So the state is basically saying that if a project meets these certain qualifications and it qualifies for affordable housing, it goes through a ministerial process where it doesn't necessarily become to the body or come to the planning commission, and our subjective standards that we have in the code don't apply. So we're not able to use like, well, it looks similar to this building, or it doesn't look similar to this building. It doesn't fit in this neighborhood. We can't use that. The state is saying you got to come up with something concrete, something that's measurable, something that's not based on opinion. So that's what we're doing right now, because we don't necessarily have that. So when you think about what kind of projects do we want along Ojai Avenue or anywhere in town, do we want them 5 stories? Do we want them to be 0 parking? Do we want them to have no setbacks? Do we, what do we want as far as the community goes? Can we apply some of our existing code on these design guidelines? Of course, but we need to put those in stone and kind of start mapping that out. So it's just kind of painting a picture on what we want, because once we create this sets the guardrails on how these projects will move forward, and it's really ministerial at that point. Like, we won't see some of these.
And I'd like to just add on top of that.
Yeah.
Something that we discussed was just thinking about the affordable housing projects, not specifically what might be developed on Ojai Ave.
Right.
And so I'm curious, Lucas, is it possible for us in the objective design standards to carve out projects that may be along the Ojai Ave corridor and be able to have specific objective design standards for that specific stretch of road compared to anything else in a different part of Ojai?
Please don't wait, jump in. Let's have a conversation.
Okay. From an objective design standard format, to answer your question, Commissioner Graham, they are linked specifically to multifamily and to so
multi-use.
multifamily, as well as so it's got to be multifamily and mixed use. So the way in which that operates, if you look at Ojai Avenue currently, the majority of Ojai Avenue is C1. C1 is commercial, so wouldn't qualify as it exists for the objective standards. Instead, those standards would be more internalized to the north or to the south. VMU being mixed use, it would qualify.
Or where we
from that
have
standpoint.
overlays, like Brian.
SPL overlay is another example, but those are so finite and so specific. We only have a handful of those.
Yeah, and so my question is more about, can we carve out specific objective design standards for Ojai Ave? Because there are going to be mixed use or multifamily developments on Ojai Ave. I think right next to the skate park, there's going to be one, right? There's also some like businesses that have like a housing structure in the back right next to that parcel. And so there are some fringe use cases, and I'm trying to steer towards Mayor Gilman's question about along Ojai Ave, what can we do to make sure that the objective design standards also fit in with our general design guidelines, so you don't end up having, something that isn't, mission style, right?
Yeah, and another framework to look at is look at what other cities are going through. Look at Ventura. Look at Santa Barbara, Camarillo. I mean, everybody's going through the same thing. So, like, I know there's a project in Ventura that's gotten a lot of pushback. The builder is trying to go the tallest that they can. They're trying to do 7 stories. The community's really pushing back, but because it's affordable housing, it's the state's kind of saying, well, too bad. So there's a lot of pushback from the city of Ventura on that one. There's another project that went off at Johnson Drive that got a lot of pushback because there's 0 parking. There's no parking because it qualifies for affordable housing. So is it necessarily what the community wanted? No, it just fit within the state guidelines and they moved. So that's what this objective standards allows us to do, is kind of put some buffer, some guardrails up, to say here's what we want as a community, versus like go crazy, do whatever you want.
Ms. Rule.
So are there any constraints that the state insists that we put into the objective guidelines? In other words, do we just have the ability to go ahead and say our objective guidelines are going to be this? Or are there, is there a density sort of requirement? My question is, do we have free reign to decide what an objective standard is going to be?
So to answer that question, the density, to a certain degree, the parking, those are pretty much set from a state law standpoint for the most part. Really, the design is, and when I talk design, I mean like building height, the materials that are placed on the facade of that building, how it interacts with the surrounding area, and even those amenities that the project benefits to those that are there. Those are all within the framework of what we're talking about.
And under our control.
And under our control.
Okay.
Now, we're looking at potentially pushing the envelope on a couple of those. We're looking closely at parking, because state standard is very, to Chair's point, the standards there have basically taken, if you qualify for affordable and it's a certain type of affordable and it's a certain percentage, suddenly those parking standards disappear, which is kind of odd given the fact that people are likely to still have vehicles but then not have to park on site, but instead end up pushing it off site.
And you also have like chits that you can get rid of some of the standards if you are building 100% affordable versus,
Exemptions.
Yeah, there's
speaking.
waivers,
exemptions.
concessions, incentives for sure.
Right. But I know that, for instance, there are laws coming up about, for instance, using CEQA or using, upzoning or using, so there are constraints. There are things that the state is looking at that communities tend to use to restrict, the state requirements. And so I'm curious about also what those are, because I know that there has to be an intent to allow affordable housing. So if your constraints are such that it looks like you're trying to stop affordable housing, then you're in a risky position with HCD.
Yeah, and I would even say, so if we even back up the train from the objective standards, when that program was developed as a part of the housing element that was adopted and certified through the state, those conversations early on were within the bailiwick of what you're just talking about, which is what standards are you doing? Oh, and by the way, we've introduced a new program for you. You're going to need to evaluate your codes and your standards to make sure that they're not restrictive to the point of restricting housing within your community. So when I was having those conversations early on and continuing over the course of a couple of years, what I realized very quickly is they're looking at our standards and recognizing that we're outside of the boundaries, and we're not the only community. To be fair, there's a lot of communities that are in the same boat that we
Yeah, of
are.
course.
It's been going on for years. Communities have found ways to circumvent development to a certain degree. And because of that, the state's now kind of has a bullseye on the communities and the standards that exist and are literally coming out with rules where I'm like, oh, that's interesting. A new rule has come up. And it basically curbs the rules that we used to have that we could use to enforce certain types of regulations from a development standpoint.
Right, so that's my question.
It is. It's
Are those something that we can
Somebody's
actually,
phone's going off.
is that something we can actually look at, or is it so vague as to let's just be reasonable and hope HCD doesn't come knocking on our door?
Can I ask it? I'm trying to find a way to maybe bridge to what Mr. Graham was bringing up possibly, which is, if I heard you right, if we stick just to Ojai Avenue just for the sake of clarity, if we were to say, what would we like to see in a standard? That's what I thought I heard you at least proposing. We come up with possibly what we would like to see in a standard and then possibly vet it. If
Sure.
that seems like an easy way to go.
Yeah,
I heard
absolutely.
what he asked a little bit
Oh,
differently.
please, go ahead.
Which I think, and correct me,
Yeah.
but what I was hearing was, can we set one set of objective standards that are going to apply along the Ojai Avenue corridor, and then have another thing that's still an objective standard that the state's asking us for, but it's going to be in kind of the residential area that's off of Ojai Avenue.
And that's
Okay.
it. And so what
Okay.
I'm thinking is objective design standards that talk about, mixed use, multifamily developments in
Okay.
Ojai. And then a caveat down the line that says, if this project is based on the Ojai Ave corridor, then these additional, objective
Okay.
criteria must apply. And it'd be things like complying with whatever the design standards are for the existing buildings that are on Ojai Ave. Like something simple like that to
Yeah.
make sure we're at least applying the same type of design standards for other properties on Ojai Ave to keep that cohesive feel downtown.
Thanks for the clarification. I appreciate it.
I also wanted to call out something else on the objective design standards. There's a threshold requirement for percentage of affordable housing to be able to take advantage of that lane, to be able to bypass, the planning commission and just work with the planning department. And right now we have that set at 20% affordable. And so we should really take a keen eye on what that 20% looks like, as well as, do we want to lower that down to 15%? Do we want to increase that up to 30%? Like where do we want to move the needle on who's going to qualify for this fast lane, knowing they're not going to have to go through?
I didn't know that was our choice. But I'm
sure
happy to
it
be
is.
mistaken.
Yeah.
I wanted to wait until you finish your comments.
Yeah.
But I have a couple points on that one. So yeah, the state has taken that one away from us. It is not 20%. It's 5%. Very low income is the minimum standard to qualify for the protections under the density bonus laws. Sorry for those on the tape. The state took away the requirement for at 20%. That's on our SPL, which is one set of rules, but the default state standard is a 5% very low income unit project qualifies for density bonus and all of the state housing protections. And it's a sliding scale, 10% low income, 15 or 20% moderate income, depending on for sale or rental. So that one, the state took away from us. So we can adjust our SPL standard if we want, but on top of all of what's in our code, state law sets it at only 5% very low income.
We could just get clarification on that, Director Siebert, on the next proposal that comes to the Planning Commission, because what we had just talked about a 20% threshold of affordable units, not talking about super low income, very low income, all of that.
Yeah, and part of the reality is a big picture point. Writing our design standards to account for every possible state law is a fool's errand, because the state's changing laws faster than we can change our standards as to what's protected. As noted, every legislative session, a new law, or in this case, this year, 50 new laws are proposed. About half of them pass. So we're never going to be able to write a set of standards that match precisely the state codes. Instead, what would be the suggestion is to write a set of rules. What do we want? And then we know there's asterisks. State law forces asterisks, and we can fight over the asterisks. Every state law asterisk has another asterisk. We can fight over the conditions, fight over whether or not it does or does not fall into the asterisk. But we're never going to be able to write our standards that map perfectly with state law because it changes so fast. So that's just one big picture comment to note on that. The other point, to circle back, we can write an objective set of design standards that have different rules for different parts of the city. We can write them that have different rules for different types of housing, different types of commercial projects, all of which we can do. The key is, one, realize that for anything that's affordable housing, again, 5% very low income or whatever new standard they come up with tomorrow, there's going to be an asterisk on whatever we write because we are part of the state. And then 2, recognize that depending on that we have to be really clear in our standards. The state's looking for, in their words, mathematical standards. It can't require looking. It can't be something we know when we see it. It has to be really clear standards. So we can develop those standards, but recognize that, we feel it's right or we feel it's wrong. The days of feeling as a regulatory tool are gone. So there's your comments. Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Lake.
That's a tweetable moment right there. So actually, for the city attorney, I just have a clarifying question. So you said that the 5% with the 5% is very low.
Yeah,
income.
very low income.
So in this context, a project that would be considered affordable would not be like moderate rate or.
Moderate's affordable too, but there's a higher percentage for moderate. So yeah, I'm summarizing. So 5% very low income, 10% low income, and it's 15 or 20% moderate, depending on whether the moderate units are for sale units or rental units. And then there's another standard for, there's another set of rules for senior housing. Need not be affordable, but 100% senior defined as 55 plus, and then another set if it's transitional or foster youth housing. But yeah, so happy to clarify that. It's a sliding scale.
Okay, thank you.
I had while you're there. So when you said it has to be objective, meaning told with numbers, let's say, if we were to say we have a design standard, which is we would prefer mission, Spanish Revival or mission style or something like that, that would not qualify?
We need to define what that means. So for example, in writing on the fly, right? Yeah. It could be mission style is defined as stucco exterior with arches, with wood corbels, with
white paint,
barrel tile roof, paint in a series of colors defined to Pantone, white or earth tones. It's really just got to be, think about what makes the mission style look.
Got it.
And write it down.
Yeah, and we can't say like, we want our buildings to be not very tall.
Right. No, I get that 100%.
It's got to be a numeric. And the other thing to
got to have a
recognize,
numeric number to it.
No, that's where stories help tremendously, right? Or height, right? A height. Fine, height.
And height's a good example also to think about. Okay, so we know there's asterisks to projects that have qualifying affordability, that meet the metrics. One of the often ones is to add more height, right? So if we think about what do we want and then recognize affordable is going to go taller. So think about where you set the base from which they can go taller.
I have a quick question. From what I understood you just to say that, if you can quantify look and feel, you can have look and feel, but you have to quantify it.
Right. You got to be able to quantify it and recognize the state may still fight it.
Okay.
But at least you're definitively objective if you can quantify it, or at least if not numeric, then at least sort of a checkbox.
Okay.
The idea of the state is that a developer can download your code, download our standards, and assess on their own without talking to anybody at the city, will this survive review or not? That's the level of objectivity they're looking for.
Matt, you said you could have a limited or a base for height on which they can build. Could you explain the on which they could build part of that?
Right. So our current height standard is 2 stories or
35 or something
feet.
like that.
Yeah.
Although there are some 3-story buildings in town that exist.
Yeah, I don't think it's
Historical.
a story. I don't think it's a story requirement. It's height.
It's a height. Yeah.
Part of it is, I think in the ADU context, we defined it in a story, although that later got outweighed by state law anyway. As part of this dance we're doing with the state. On height, so we have a standard at 30 feet. You cannot build above 30 feet unless you qualify for certain kinds of affordable housing, and then you can go above it if you have a waiver, an incentive, or a concession, which you get if you have a density bonus project where you have enough affordable in the qualifying metrics. Then you can ask for, and we must approve unless we can make certain findings, that higher height.
But do these apply to the objective design standards?
Yes, because objective design standards are part of design, zoning and design standards, which are subject to incentives and concessions and waivers under the density bonus law.
But now,
again, if you have the qualifying affordability, there are some asterisk findings the city can make on the back end to deny an incentive or concession or a waiver, but those findings, we need a good record in we don't have a case to
How
litigate.
broad are these concessions or waivers?
An incentive or a concession or a waiver can vary any development standard.
Someone could come in and ask for a 7-story house, or I mean, a building based on X, Y, and Z
Yes.
concessions.
We had one.
And
I was
we
going to
would
say, it's
not
happened.
have,
We've had one for 10 stories.
Yeah.
We had
I
several
know.
applications for 10 stories. We were able to take care of that another way, and those never got approved. But
how do we
yes.
protect from that?
We advocate for the state to restore local control.
Mr. Whitman, you're trying to come in.
Yeah, I want to make sure I understand correctly. It sounds to me like you're saying that we need to kind of reverse engineer from the idea, okay, they're going to get a bonus, and if we don't want things to be over 3 or 4 stories, then we need to set our base so that that bonus.
Yeah, to
Is
an
it-
extent that
is
the
it-
council wants to, yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
is it still true? I want to make sure I missed, changing the law, but it's still largely based upon bonuses that you get when you achieve affordable housing thresholds, and that means you can be more dense, you can be taller, but it's a percentage kind of bonus that is a multiplier to whatever your standards were.
The percentage multiplier applies to density. There's no percentage standard on the incentives, waivers, or concessions, but we can make the showing, or at least attempt to make the showing, that it has to go back to what do you need extra to make the affordable work. So you
There's
can
a great
have-
example. When in the planning commission, when you talked about the Montgomery Street project and you showed the density increase with a chart, that was very clear. You said what's allowed, what is happening by the extra, and then what are they asking for, and this body, went forward. So that's the kind of thing that we would have to be looking at project by project, I presume, right? Is what's allowed presently, what's allowed that because the affordable housing percentage.
Correct. And
Make project
the
work.
same metrics have been applied for parking because there's
Yeah.
state standards versus what our standards are versus what they propose.
Mm-hmm.
So
And
I
at
want-
heart, if I can make one point there,
Yeah.
at heart, if we can show that the developer is asking for 20 stories to accommodate 2 extra units, we have a pretty good chance of showing that that goes too far, that extra height and all the market rate units inherent in that height aren't necessary to make the affordable work. But if they're proposing, 50 extra affordable units and they want 1 more story, we probably don't win that fight. Because they can probably make the showing that the 1 extra story, the extra 15 feet in height, is necessary to accommodate that extra 50 units. And I'm using 2 extremes to avoid litigating facts not in evidence, but that's the sort of, those are your sense of it. So that's where it goes back to the findings. The standard the city has to meet to deny an incentive, a waiver, or a concession is to show that it's not necessary to make the affordable housing affordable.
I see.
So the projects that were mentioned where they applied for 7 stories or 10 stories, were those builder remedy based requests, or were they applying based upon affordable housing bonuses?
Both. So those ones were both builder's remedy and density bonus projects. And we never had to tease out the distinctions between the two because they never moved beyond the pre-application stage. But they were coming under both, is those large projects. And all of those applications are dead. They have failed to proceed with their pre-applications, and the city has a certified housing element, so builder's remedy is also dead.
Can I one question for either one of you guys? So if you think of the projects that have been approved, like let's say Cabrillo and Bryant, as an example, they come with a project. I'm proposing it, and you tell me if I've got it right. They're proposing, here's the number of units that we need to make it viable. Here's how many stories we need, or the footprint for it, what kind of density we need. The viability is something that they come up with. Is that correct?
Yeah, the developer
Okay.
has to figure out what they think is viable. Then they come to us and assess. And we'll say, well, that does or doesn't meet our codes. And in their case, they were approved for the extra height under both
I
the
remember
overlay and the density bonus.
I totally get. But then, but if somebody came to you and said, "We need 200 units to be viable," just because they're saying that doesn't mean it happens. It might be true or it might not be true. But can we question the viability that they're proposing?
Within bounds set by the state, we can ask for more information on it.
Okay.
And part of it goes back to what's the base density. So the Bryan example, the base density was 42, and they asked for 8 extra, if I remember right. So that was well within the density bonus percentages, given
Right.
that they were 100% affordable.
Right.
If they were trying to take the density 10x, they wouldn't have been they wouldn't have met that standard.
That answers it in a way. It's reasonable enough that we accept it, right? It's just a little bit more.
And the numeric component in density is numeric versus the rest of this is not numeric.
Okay.
So on the density bonus standards, that is a math problem. If you have this much affordable, you get this many extra units.
That's
you
the way
have
I
that much
understood
affordable, you get that many extra units.
Mm-hmm.
It's where the numerics drop out is incentives, waivers, and concessions.
So I have a question. So we talked about the idea of a project being viable and, you know, whether we can explore that viability. I want to make sure I understand what viable means. And so, you know, when I was on planning 15 years ago or so, developers often came in and said, oh, the project doesn't pencil out unless I get this many units.
Right.
Is that what we're talking about with viability? That whatever financial model that they put together is dependent on a certain number of units being that they're
Yeah,
able
we
to
can't
market.
go into the details of their models anymore. That's where it's different than it was before. But what we can, the finding to deny an incentive, a waiver, a concession, in summary, is we can deny it if we can show that the incentive, waiver, or concession is not necessary to lower the price of the affordable units. So that's where we get into the viability, but not overall project viability. And of course, we are forced to make that finding. The burden of proof is on the city. The burden is in favor of the developer, and we have to do it without being able to ask for their pro forma. So making that standard isn't the easiest case to make, but it would depend on the particular situation.
But like when we saw the project that was on the Ojai Valley News for some 100 number of units, you know, near Nordhoff, that seemed unreasonable because it was so much larger than anything else that we had seen. That's an easy one to respond to, it seems to me. But the one that's just a few more is probably likely to be.
Yeah,
accepted.
using those extremes far out, the standard is likely to be difficult to defend for the developer just inside the standard. And that one was both density bonus and builder's remedy.
Ms. Roll, you're trying to come in.
Yeah, so I excuse me. When you say incentive, waiver, and concession, those are all synonymous terms.
No, the synonym is incentives and concessions. There's a slash waivers. There's slightly different standards for the two.
Okay. We don't have to go into the weeds. I was just curious.
Yeah,
and
no, that's a fair point.
I can check it out. So just to bring things back to Ojai Ave, we have a height limit of 35, you said, which is 2 stories. So if we were to make
Unless you have a really small, short story.
right, so if we were to bring a baseline, we'd have to bring the baseline down to 1 story. If we wanted to adjust a baseline in order to sort of protect against someone being able to use a waiver for height. And I mean, because we were talking about, you know, where should we start in order to, you know, reverse engineer. But we're so low right now, we'd have to go to 1.
That seems like
story.
a hard sell.
It does seem like a hard sell. Just want to say, I was thinking about that going, well, we only have, the max is 2.
But
you
we
know?
have so many 2-story buildings already.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying that if we were going to.
I hear you.
You, okay, yeah.
Yeah,
so-
Well, there is one factor that would at least create an argument for 1 story, and that is energy efficiency. A 1-story structure is way more efficient in our very hot environment than 2-story, where you're having to crank out the energy to keep the second floor cool. So I don't know that helps us with HCD at all. If we were to try to adopt that, and maybe that's a pipe dream to suggest we'd say, hey, we 1-story standard.
That'd be more restrictive than our current code, right? Yeah.
Is that even, I mean, because everyone always says, you know, for efficiency, you build stories.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, building materials, land, the whole thing. I've always heard, I mean, I prefer a ranch house myself, but everything I always hear is no, you know, more stories is more efficient. maybe not for heating. I don't know.
The cost per unit goes down.
Cost per unit.
Yeah,
If you're talking about energy efficiency, I think you're probably not on the same page. It's an interesting conversation. I'm from the Midwest, so immediately I think, why don't we build basements? And that has never caught in any sort of wind at all here.
We're in a fractured environment.
Earthquakes,
I mean,
Lucas.
but
We have
the-
earthquakes.
Right. Yes, so
You know,
it's dead
Cab-
immediately.
The Cabrillo project did the half story.
That's right.
Yep.
You know, they so it's like a half basement, but it's
Yeah.
a living space.
That's interesting.
And
Yep.
so, I mean, that's something we could take a look at, that if you're going to go, you know, if you're going to get a bonus to raise your height, maybe we look at the idea that you got to do that half story scheme.
That's interesting.
In order to.
That is actually a good point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Graham, I thought you were suggesting this, and maybe something we've talked about in the past, but I thought tell me if I'm off base here, even if we would entertain these projects and have to accept some of them, I thought we at least want to say, does it fit with the aesthetic that we're proposing in our city? No, I mean, that's part of the conversation that we want to have.
Well, if it's in our objective standards, yes.
Yeah.
But if we just come and say, hey, this doesn't look like our other buildings, that doesn't work.
No, of course. So it'd have to be objective. And that's what I guess when I think about projects that are coming forward, that's something that's in my mind is, does it fit with something that we think generally works in our city?
And that's what we have to define.
And that's what we have to define.
Yes.
And so what I'm trying to really
Yeah.
get at is making sure that we include everything in the objective design standards
Yeah.
that we want
Yeah.
to see on a certain corridor, so that we don't mess up, and
I
then
get
they
it.
can build whatever they want from a design standpoint
Mm-hmm.
on Ojai Ave.
So avoid being silent on some common design feature that would leave this open hole for
Yes.
something we don't want to
Mhm.
see.
So if we like the 35 feet as a height requirement, and we make that recommendation to Lucas, and he puts that in our objective design standards.
Mm-hmm.
So those are just, as you guys have ideas about what you'd like to see, make those recommendations, because Lucas is working on those right now.
Yeah.
So, and this may be a question for our attorney. This is a program that's being pushed down by the state. Have your objective design standards. There are other state laws that come into play. At what point are we complying with state law and putting in our own objective design standards? And at what point does the state trump, these local design standards that we came up with? Because we've talked about this parking discussion, and I'd love to find a way for us to be able to carve out more restrictive parking standards under this fast lane for objective design standard review. But if it goes against the state requirements, at what point do we have leeway to kind of say, well, we are complying with the state because you've told us to develop our own?
Mm.
Yeah, so if I'm understanding your question, if we're looking at a fast lane for parking, it would be if you meet our standards, you get lower parking requirements or higher parking requirements?
They would be more restrictive in terms of, we want to see more parking per
spaces.
unit,
Yeah.
right?
So if we require more parking than the state standards for a density bonus project, that fails.
Mm.
So the state straight up dictates in the government code, government code, projects that would qualify for a density bonus through any of the affordability metrics, parking standards are defined. And I forget the numbers off the top of my head. It's like a half a space per 0 to
But
1
we
bedroom.
can go lower.
Yeah.
We could go lower if we wanted to.
We
not
can go
higher.
lower, but not higher.
I see.
Lower meaning fewer parking spaces
Understood.
required, but not
Yeah.
more.
Right.
So it's already baked in.
So that's already baked into the code.
Mhm.
Now, if a project doesn't qualify for the affordability protections, then we have free reign on parking. So commercial parking standards, we have free reign there.
Mhm.
It's the housing projects, and particularly the affordable housing projects, where we lack free reign
Mhm.
on the parking standards.
So what occurs to me is that there's a lot of tension in this issue in the city. There's certainly a sizable group of people who would like a walkable and bikeable Ojai, and sees that the dedicating space to more parking spaces is sort of antithetical to that for various reasons. We heard Star Child himself speak to that. And we also, when you take a look at a city and you look at all of the property that is reserved for cars, you start to wonder, kind of, is that really what you want? So to me, this is a very deep discussion that the community really needs to have regarding, the within the constraints of what the state requires, but also, Ms. Francina, Councilmember Francina has been talking about a walkable, bikeable Ojai for 25 years. And one of the major sort of premises of that is you don't build for cars, you build for people.
The flawed logic there is
No, I know, but it's a question to have, yeah.
The flawed logic there is that just because there's a parking space doesn't mean it's going to be filled with a car for that unit. What we actually need is parking spaces to ensure that if there is a car, that they're going to be parked in that parking space rather than out on the street causing more congestion.
Yeah, I'd also like to argue that a lot of these no parking requirements are based on a UCLA study that was done, 10 years ago. It's kind of this new urbanism movement. And it's great for very dense downtown cities like LA, Santa Barbara,
Minneapolis,
San Francisco, where you've got basically everything's in a walkable distance. I can walk to my store. I can walk to get my clothes. Everything is in a walkable space. I can ride my bike. It's like a European city. But when you live in kind of a rural area, like let's say I'm living in Miners Oaks and I don't have a market close to where I am. I can't go, to walk to Rains to buy my clothes. I have to actually get in a car and drive to Ventura to go get my clothes. I can't afford to get my clothes at Rains. Or maybe I can't afford to shop at Westridge. Maybe I need to go.
I think it's a conversation to have. And I just want to bring up
you got to be careful of the blanket kind of solution.
Well, I would argue to 5 of your points right there, but this isn't the place for that. But the idea that there is an argument to be had in a conversation within the community is very important to have.
Sure.
Totally agree with you.
I just want one little check-in, okay? Because we have lots of fun things. Well, not to say, this is what I want to propose. So we have 4 big subject areas, and we've used half our time on half of one. But I don't feel a rush. In other words, I think we should really get through some of this, and if we want to have another one of these, let's do it. But
I think with the objective design standards, I think we really wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of what they are and how important they are, and how important it is that Lucas is working on those. Those are going to come back to us as a body, as a planning commission, to review. But please be involved, be active in that process, because these are really important for us moving forward for like the next 10, 20 years.
Yeah.
And on that point, I think it's important that we have some degree of guidance on for Lucas and I think legal counsel because we do have to publish those objective standards, or HCD is gonna. So I think we need to be very thoughtful and forward thinking about how we put those together, and almost our city council being almost secondary to the smart guys who know what they can get approved by HCD.
I'm going to have to take issue with that. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I'm actually kidding. But I think the important piece of this also is to get a vision from the community as to what they would like to see as an objective standard, rather than rather than a top down and then push out. I really feel like this particular issue is a bottom up, and figuring out, then we let the smart people figure out how you actually word that and what you actually do with it. And I don't know where a parking commission would come into this with parking, but does parking expand to walking and biking? Is a parking commission really a transportation commission? I don't know. It's an idea to think about. Since we don't have one yet, we can make it be what we think it needs to be.
So I'm trying to remember whether I'm gonna ask the city manager. I think we talked about the idea of doing a traffic commission. And I think it was proposed that maybe we should have parking as part of the traffic commission. And I don't remember if the city manager said, no, adding parking is not a good idea, or I can't remember.
No, thank you. I love that. Actually, I think what I've experienced in other cities where I've been is actually traffic and safety.
Yeah.
And so it's a combination of Public Works and police, and so the Public Works Director and the police chief are the staff liaisons. But really, almost anything out in the street, with the exception of infrastructure improvements, but even some of them, depending on what they are, if they impact pedestrian right-of-way, are all fair game for traffic and safety.
I think we should do it.
Well, I think
Can
you
I
decided to.
We decided, I mean, to
I was
add,
just
add
gonna
the
say,
parking
that was
into
in
it.
our, that was in our goals and
greenlighted us.
priorities.
We,
uh,
but
2
we didn't
weeks,
add
a week
parking
ago.
to the
Well,
list as well.
but
Yeah.
it is logical.
Great.
And in
Yeah.
most places
that's
it falls
coming
there.
back to us with a.
So Mr. Montgomery has been given the splendid assignment of, it's actually, yes, you have to put it into your code. You're going to have to appoint, it's a Brown Act committee, all that stuff. But we will get that process underway. Thank you.
I think that's a great takeaway.
Do we bring it back for discussion? Because I would like to think about it being a transportation commission.
Because it's an ordinance that you'll have to introduce to amend your code, you have that opportunity.
Okay, great.
Certainly.
Thank you.
I was going to can we go to the second bullet point?
I felt like we were jumping to parking.
Yes.
I wanted to, make sure
I want
we
that too.
Yeah.
go to the general design guideline.
Because this is
citywide.
where I thought your commission taught recently when we talked about Ojai Avenue across from Attilaha and the Ojai Valley Inn, and then the Boku property and all that kind of stuff. And I thought there was a real question about what do we want things to look like between downtown and Vaughn's. So I think that's a conversation we need to have.
Yes.
And if I heard you guys right, there's something like a West End, East End, different design standards, or they overlap in some interesting ways. That would be interesting to hear about.
So Jonathan and I met briefly to talk about this, just to try to get an idea of what sort of vision we should have, because we don't really have a vision for what the west side should be. So we looked at, okay, what are the design guidelines for downtown? What are the design guidelines for the east side? And obviously downtown is more compact, it's more dense. And then as you get outside, it gets a little more rural. And so things loosen up a little bit, and you can have, difference in building types and whatnot. So we felt like that kind of transition was appropriate on the west side. So that's kind of the general vision we were thinking of, making it kind of a transitional zone between people coming in, from Ventura into Ojai, into this more dense environment.
I don't know
And what's the definition of west side? Is it everything west of Bristol, or?
Yeah, I think starting at the Y potentially, into downtown.
From the Y to effectively Bristol, or further into the, where the Ojai Avenue makes its turn,
Or Country Club, because that
I was
would
gonna
include Boku and the inn, that all that property.
Yeah,
there.
so that, I
Clough
mean, that
Park,
would.
does it into Clough Park?
You're talking. We see the problem.
Yeah, well, I think the downtown design guidelines stop at Signal, don't they?
Yes, they do. They
Yeah,
don't go any
so it's
further.
like,
Okay.
it's not, doesn't go very far to the west.
Ms. Mag, do you have something?
No, I was just.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah, so if you think about what we're talking about, it's like Signal Street all the way to the Y.
Okay.
To Vaughn's.
Because like El Roblar took many of the standards.
didn't have to.
They didn't have to, and they did,
Yeah.
right? And we saw all that go
Because
by.
they wanted to go with kind of a,
Right, the arcade-like
a historical look.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so if we're talking about the next 20 years of development in
Yeah.
Ojai,
Yep.
it starts with coming into town, at the
Yes.
Vons, at the Y.
Mhm.
What do we want to have that look like? And I don't necessarily agree it should be some sort of farmhouse, whatever, you want there. I think we should come up with objective criteria that kind of meets the look and feel. And I would like it to actually blend into the downtown corridor. And so how do we do that? What does that look like, rather than allowing people to kind of build what they want? Because right now it is a hodgepodge of design.
Eclectic.
So,
That's a better word.
Yeah.
I'd love to see it mirror more of the downtown architecture.
So when I was on planning, John Burry, who was a council member, also an architect, he convinced the city council that we should have a Mead Requa, which is the architects who did the post office, the chapel, the arcade, and there used to be like across from the arcade used to be a lot more elaborate than it is now. But so issue number one, are we still as a community thinking that we should continue that in at least in that, downtown area? And then, number two, how far does it go? And I actually really loved the conversation that the Planning Commission had, talking about the farmhouse design. And I was kind of, waiting to hear whether there is going to be a discussion about the Mead Requa, concept. I don't know if I'm saying that
Mission
second name
Revival?
correctly.
Yeah, it makes sense. Like that building is going to be there for 10 years at least, right? Before something else happens with it,
Yeah.
if not longer. And so if we set objective guidelines to be more, mission revival, are we actually shooting ourselves in the foot because it's still going to be an eclectic with the farmhouse? So it is a good discussion.
Yeah.
I think there's a couple of things
please.
that.
Yeah, go.
There's a couple of things about it. I mean, there's style, and I think we jumped to style pretty quickly. But there's a big part of it about how it's the urban form, how that looks as you approach, Ojai, and then as it transitions to, kind of past West or just past Westridge. And then we get a certain type of urban form up until about a little past Fox, or around Fox. And I think that, so there's kind of multiple items for us to consider when it comes to like, what does a West End design, standard look like? The East End has a variety of styles, but it speaks a lot about, obviously, relationship to the front, to the street, how parking works, how open space works. And I think that was really something that I found problematic with the review of the winery. I mean, more so I think than necessarily just the style. I think we have to, like you're saying, we got to think about that in depth, but there's a lot of different ways in which that can work. But you have this kind of clear delineation when you come into town of a lot more parking on the street, a lot more setback buildings, a lot less of a feeling of being in a town and more just kind of driving through a space until you hit what we love. And I think that definitely part of what we love about Ojai is probably elements of that style, and it feels very natural. But I think it's also that there is like an urban form that feels like a part of a small town. It's creating a small town. So that would be like, I think the kind of like a little broader way of thinking about it as far as how to sort of approach the crafting of this idea.
Can you speak more to what the urban form looks like to you?
Yes,
Or can I add to the question, Mr. Chesley? Would it be that, are you proposing that there may be a few different kinds of designs, you might say, that fall into this general family of design? Is that where you're getting at also?
Yeah, I think that, so I forget all of them on the east side, for example, but we do have like Mission Revival, we have like a Western, we have, Lucas can remind me of all of them. There's about 3 or 4 different like styles, meaning materials, kind of the types of openings, how roofs look, whether there's sort of like build outs allowed or balconies, things like this. So there's that element of it, right? And that plays into obviously the look and the feel. But there's also just the fact that once you hit a certain point in Ojai, it's like the requirement is to have it be, a town feel. So you have all the buildings, for example, are pushed to the street front.
Yep.
Parking happens either in back or in some of these other ways that we're talking about. So there's, I think when I speak to urban forms, like when you come into town, I don't, you guys have used reasonable words for it. I don't know if there's like a distinct urban form. I think you hit Boku has a lot of parking, and now the winery development is going to have a lot of parking, and then you get some parking lots and then a little building and then some parking and a lot of setback stuff, which was I think very common and sort of thought to be the way of the future when these things were originally being developed. But once you hit Westridge, it all shifts, and these are the areas that I think we end up talking about a lot more because, and that feel very close to our hearts in a lot of ways. And then as you kind of keep going, it opens up again, but it's not really developed. Like nothing's, the East End has these guidelines, but not a lot's happened. And the things that have happened or that are there are actually kind of pushed towards the streets. There's just kind of like there's a lot of like space or void or to be seen zones where those haven't really been built up in any way. So it's not quite the same. Whereas there are actual distinct developments that have happened from, in the last, 50 years from basically, like the Vaughns where, 33 and 150 meet to Sigma.
Yeah.
And just to point out, so coming into the city, you're heading west to east, right? But if you were to look across the street on the north side of the street, you certainly have an incredible hodgepodge of all different kinds of styles. And that's not what you are, that's not what you get when you come in, because obviously you're coming in heading east. So you're going to be looking to your right for the most part, not across at the left. But the north side of Ojai Ave is really wild. The south side of Ojai Ave right now, and I'm not clear, does the inn own everything from Boku to Country Club?
No.
With the exception of the yellow building.
Yep.
Okay, with the exception of the Crystal building.
Correct.
Okay, so they own everything basically from the Y to Country Club.
Not the park.
I was going to say, the
Well,
park.
okay, yeah.
But I think we are
not
okay.
the park. Yeah. Okay, not the park. And
But yes.
I didn't know they didn't own the Crystal, so that's good to know. So, and I think, as I recall, there's something in our code that would not prevent them, but ask them to look at this space as a continuous space. Like if you're going to build out, you don't build out a farmhouse here and build out something else at Boku and then take your parking lot and sort of make it something else. We have one owner for that entire strip until we get to Country Club, and then, we have all the little houses, which are very cute and,
But are you proposing that they have some obligation to have it look unified? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, and I think there's something in the code, as I recall, that if you own a large stretch of land, you have to put up sort of a complete vision of it as opposed to piecemeal. I'm not sure,
Let's
and I
find
can
out.
go back and look for it.
I have to go back and look to see if that's specifically identified, but I'm not remembering
Okay.
like a streetscape type of
Yeah,
scenario.
yeah. Bill Wyrick brought it up. Bill Wyrick brought it up in
Master
public
plan,
comments.
yes.
Yeah.
But that tends to be.
I don't know if it qualifies.
Yeah.
Okay.
Look, I'll take a closer look, but
Yeah, but it's
See what's-
interesting to note that
Yeah.
there is one owner of all of that property.
Mr. Summers, yeah.
Yeah, so there's a couple standards that may be in mind there. One is our TCO traffic corridor overlay that requires certain standards for driveway access and for roadway access on Ojai Avenue, which came up when the Topo Topo Winery was approved before the first time back in 15. And then prior planning staff had not applied it, and then it was applied correctly when it got through the process. So that kicks in for that whole strip there. There's also certain standards under both our code and CEQA about assessing a unified project together, but it doesn't necessarily trigger based solely on ownership because the zoning in that area does vary. Some is zoned C1, some is zoned IR3. If I remember right, some may be zoned R1. So that's where it would depend on what's particularly proposed. We can certainly take a look at that.
I was going to say,
if anything is proposed
Mr.
specifically.
Graham, to the point that you're making, if I'm at Vaughn's and I'm heading east, first of all, Vaughn's has the arches, as we know. And when I start thinking, many of the buildings have some kind of Mission Revival-ish style or styles. Not all, but many do. And if I go down the road, I think Matilaha has a little bit of that. OVS has a little bit of that. Then I think even like Live Sotheby's has some of it. They're having the tiles and the stucco. But then there's like the Rancho that doesn't. So I do see the differences, and I see there's some homes there. So were you proposing that if Mission Revival were to be the frame, we could be shooting ourselves in the foot? Is that what you were suggesting, possibly?
I was saying if we choose something that's different than what's currently there,
Okay.
right, or that's being proposed to be developed, like the new winery that's there, or sure, OVS, Matilaha, then potentially we are going to just stay in a hodgepodge because those things may not change for the next 20 years. So
I see.
looking at what's there, identifying what's most contiguous, and then developing a standard around that. And I don't know from beyond a style what that looks like in terms of setbacks or whatever else it is.
Mr. Bennett, please.
I think we need to tread very carefully here. The defining property from Bristol to the Y, as you're heading west on the left, is the winery, which is 11 years old. I mean, there's nothing that looked Spanish on that property before then. It was a Mission Revival.
Right.
You know, it looked like what it was, and there were two car dealerships over there.
Right, I remember.
And Boku still looks like a car dealership, you know,
Right.
waiting for a new identity. But there is a lot of board and batten farm housing there, and these are smaller buildings, some of which have been moved onto their lots along there. And the mixture of uses is interesting. And I'm not sure, I think we need a beginning to the city and an end to the city, the Mead and Requa portion, or Mead and Requa influence portion of the city, which starts certainly, well, where the library is and where, you know, the theater is, and on one side, and the church is on the other side. And that's sort of the beginning, and the hotel certainly is that, and that's all Spanish Revival. And then you hit the arcade, and you come out on the unfortunate use of a property for a gas station in that zone is unfortunate. And boy, we've got to build some incentives in there for somebody to convert that, because you lose the whole pedestrian nature on that side of the street when you put the gas station in there. But the other side, you know, the Roti building is a Spanish Revival building, and the school certainly has elements of that, and that's sort of where the end is. At which point, I think we've got to be very loose in terms of allowing people to build there. But I think we can also say what we don't like is parking lots in the front, buildings behind, in a setback which feels like the urban mini mall experience that you get when you get to Los Angeles.
Right.
But I guess I was not on the same side of this discussion as my colleague here, because I do believe we have a variety of architectural designs, and we have to be open. I think we need to be open to that, even for the winery, which is a very sympathetic piece of architecture, you know, Spanish Revival architecture. And people say, "Oh, why do we need to change that? Why don't we just, you know, keep it the way it is?" And it's like, you know, I don't believe, and we have somebody here from the Historic Preservation Commission, but I don't believe that in 10 years it managed to save itself by being historic. And I'm not sure that we don't want to open ourselves up to new, profound, good design of any type. And this is where I believe in the objectives, and that is parking. You know, it's not an acceptable position, and we can deal that objectively, to put your parking out front. You know, it's got to be in the back. I think that the idea of a traffic commission is a very interesting one, integrating automobile safety, et cetera.
Mayor Gilman, can I
Yes, please.
just to
Go.
be advised of,
Yep.
just looking at time, I know we only have a half hour.
Mhm.
So I wanted to get through some of these if we can. So let's, if we can, have a quick discussion on parking. I mean, hopefully it can be quick.
Can I just ask
So
one question?
can
What's
I-
go ahead, say one
just,
thing, and I have one
I just
tiny
want
thing
to
say.
jump in. Sorry to.
Yeah, no,
but,
go ahead.
You know, historically, and you guys kind of discussed this a little bit at that meeting. The property where Jim and Rob's is, they did not come out with a kind of a Spanish Revival design. The Council Planning Commission impose that on them. Los Arbolos was not a Spanish design. Came out as a more of a I'm not architectural enough to answer that, but the Westridge East End did not plan a Spanish design. They were told that they had to do that. And the Firebird, similarly. So as people have, now, and this is going back a while, but as people have, come up with their projects, they've said, well, if you're going to do that, you're going to have to meet, this design. And I'm not saying that's right. But I like the fact that the Planning Commission talked about, well, how fair is it to say to all these businesses over the last 30 years or so that you're going to fit within this design concept, and then to say, oh, now we're not doing that anymore. Is my only comment, and please go on to parking.
No, you're good.
Let me just say, so it sounds to me like, just maybe in conclusion,
Yeah.
I was trying to say what's the takeaway or where do we go from here?
Yeah.
But it sounds like everything that would come up, you would be looking at it, and we would eventually look at it and say, oh, it's new and it's interesting, and does it fit here?
Right.
So if somebody said, I want to build on Bald, or I want to build at or Boku,
Right.
we would all be looking at that trying to ask. But I thought the crux of the matter was sort of like the farmhouse versus the
well, there is
as
a
one piece.
is a general theme in town where most folks feel that it's a mission revival type of feel.
Of course.
That's not necessarily reflective in our guidelines.
I see. Yeah.
So what we're trying to do is, if we want that, let's reflect that in our guidelines.
I see. Yeah.
But the question becomes, how far do you extend it?
Right.
I really like the Mission Revival center of town, but I am not yet convinced that we have, as we expand both east and west, that we have to maintain that specific design style.
There's interesting things too. Like if you said, well, there's a I'm just going to use the inn as an example. There's a farmhouse, but then there's going to be these stucco walls around it, and there's going to be this winery that's going to be sort of stucco-y on parts. Then you say, well, how far does it go that it still fits? I think the inn would argue it is fitting, right? So that's, I hear what you're saying, Mr. Whitman, and I do all of those projects. I remember we asked them, I wasn't on the commission, but make it look like it fits, and I'm glad they did, because it generally fits.
Should we rediscuss at a later date where the East End design guidelines start? Because right now we're saying, well, it's Bristol to the Y, and we're having this conversation about.
You mean the West End?
Sorry.
Okay.
But we're really talking about this mission revival kind of ending at Westridge.
Yeah.
Well,
So maybe we have two different design, like
I mean, we're talking
general
about
design
bookends.
guidelines.
So I think both sides, East and West, we all kind of agree that the core that we have is something that we should maintain. And then where is it that we're going to loosen up the standards? We should have some agreement about that.
Well, you guys.
And so my point.
You and Jonathan were meeting, right?
Yep.
And did you?
That's kind of what we came up with.
Okay.
We wanted to have a bookend type of style.
Yeah.
Wait, to
where
my
it's
point,
similar.
to finish what I was saying.
Go ahead.
Westridge to, the post office. Maybe there are different design guidelines for that stretch of the eastern corridor, or is it the western corridor? And then there's additional, guidelines for the edge of Westridge up to the Y. And those, are a little bit different because then that really talks about blending in to coming down into Ojai.
Yeah, and it also extends the downtown. We could extend the downtown guidelines to include that piece.
Rather than trying to now
that's a good
bunch it
idea.
all into.
I like that.
You also could go from Fox to Bryant and wonder about that too.
Okay.
Maybe
Can
it's
I-
a question.
Okay, that's the takeaway. Okay.
Go ahead, Lucas.
Can I offer just one little
Yeah.
little piece here to potentially nudge it forward and potentially have this as a part of a working program that commissioners are working on? An RFP, a request for proposals that is built through the planning commission, that has the framework that Chesley's talking about, that Graham is talking about, design pieces, all of that kind of folded into an RFP where we have a third party potentially weigh in. But give that framework by which to put a proposal together. That would then help us with the design guidelines that we're looking to the west, and then help frame, does it end up being two different guidelines or one design guideline that has two different pieces or three different pieces? You know what I mean?
That sounds to me like a good starting point. I mean, it gives us a jumping off point if there are, in fact, companies that do this, which I guess there's companies that do anything that you want them to do, but that sounds reasonable to me, provided, we give them the correct background information, then we have a jumping off point, and it allows the planning commission a place to move from.
That sounds reasonable to me too.
I also like this because this transitions right to our parking conversation.
Go.
Because one of the things we wanted to talk about was a request for a proposal around parking, but not for parking studies, because we've had parking studies done in the past, and the parking studies are all the same. Basically, they say we have plenty of parking. We all know that we have issues in certain pockets of our town, specifically the downtown corridor, specifically South Montgomery. So what we wanted to talk about is potentially looking for a request for proposal where we could look to hire a consulting company to look at ideas and solutions around fixing our code potentially, and also the parking downtown, and what we can do to maximize the free parking that we already have that nobody uses, and potentially look at circulation issues around the arcade. Because we all know tourists come into town, they want to park right in front of the arcade, and they just drive in circles until they get a parking spot.
I'm a local and I do that.
Yeah. I know business owners that do that themselves.
It's all being done because the employees of the stores are parked in front of their stores.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Ms.
they
Lang,
park
please.
there all day long.
Okay.
And meters solve that problem, but meters are a dirty word.
To be discussed.
To be discussed, that's what the RFP would be for.
Yeah, that's right.
I just
About
wanted,
Insulation,
I just wanted to mention that in our discussion about our goals and priorities, we were on the same page.
Oh, good.
With this falls under a couple of different categories. One of the categories we haven't gotten to yet was tourism management, and I think I'd like to, in the interest of time, I'd like to propose that we revisit this topic and the RFP specifically after we finish our goals and priorities. Because if we're going to be building this commission, or if we're going to be establishing a commission for parking safe or for traffic and safety, this could align with that as well. And it also does go under our goals for the broader vision of how we manage tourism and economic diversification.
I want to second that, but only because we speak a lot about lots that are for sale, how the traffic flows happen, the traffic studies done by us or the chamber. And my goal, I guess, in my mind is how do you get people out of their cars as fast as possible? That's the goal that I've been thinking about. And so there's different strategies around that, or where they come through, like on Montgomery, that's a typical way into town. So then how do you get them out fast? So there's many solutions that are being proposed, and I agree with Ms. Lang. I would love to see us working together, and then as we define these goals and lay that out, to say it could be an acquisition of a lot, it could be, or even several, or traffic pattern changes or something like that. But I think it's a problem that we're all seeing.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Especially on the weekends. But you were going to say something.
Well, just if the plan is that we get some independent advice, third party, expert advice on this, and that issue about the design guideline, I'd really like to see a report come to city council and an explanation of how much it's going to cost us and what we should expect to gain from a description of what we're going to get.
Mr. Harvey, does that seem reasonable?
Jump past that.
Sorry, man. No, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I was asking, does that seem like a reasonable request, is to get some outside consultation
course.
around this? Okay. And
Of
then
course, absolutely.
Get a report.
The only thing that might be unreasonable is whatever time frame you might have in mind, but that's.
Well, I was thinking by the next council meeting, if that's okay. No, just kidding. Just
Perfect.
kidding. When we get it.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Uh-huh.
I don't think either of these projects are something that we have like a fire burning under them. So.
But I would like to add, additional to the strategies and you know, with tourism management, we also want to look at what our current code is and what the parking requirements are in our code. Like, for example, does it make sense to have 2 card covered parking requirements for single family homes? I don't know. Something to look at.
Just would ask Mr. Montgomery to please capture these action items if you would, please. I know you are. Thank you.
Yeah,
There's no gigantic fire, except for that there possibly are some interesting properties that would, at least, it would be interesting to have some conversations about before they sold. That would be in line where parking could be, but there's always going to be properties, I guess.
Hint, hint, nudge, 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 nudge. I got
If
you.
I may.
Go
Please.
ahead. So one of my concerns, and I have had a lot of people talk to me about this, is that, you know, around parking and the parking requirements in our development standards is a concern that we don't apply those consistently. And so that you may get a waiver of the requirements, and then somebody else may have to go the full boat. And I think that is something, I mean, I want every.
You mean commercially or residential?
That's primarily commercial.
Okay.
Primarily commercial, but you know, I think it could be an issue residentially too. And I think that, I mean, I have this, you know, vision that we create our design standards, and then, you know, applicants for their projects, like, actually look at our design standards and design their project to fit our design standards, instead of coming in and say, hey, I want to do something different. And so I've appreciated that the Planning Commission has raised that issue on multiple occasions that I've observed. But I think we need to kind of come to grips with that and get a message to the public that the design standards, you know, are what they are, and unless it's a real hardship, you're going to stick with those.
100% agree.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's good.
If we're going to purchase other properties to build parking, love that idea. For whatever report we're going to have, it'd be awesome to identify where these existing parking lots are and where the gaps are, because we don't want one big parking lot in the center of town just going to cause congestion. We want to spread them out and make sure that these are the hot spots. These are the areas that, you know, are potentially missing parking. And it'd be awesome to identify opportunities to help spread that out.
It's interesting, though. The problem is you don't want to have a parking lot that nobody uses either. So it's finding the right spot.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's more,
No, I know, like,
more complicated than what
There's
I'm
great
describing.
parking
Yeah.
by the Thai place if you want to walk 2 blocks.
Downtown Libby's got a lot of.
Yeah. Mr. Bennett, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I just have one other thing. If we're dealing with, in the conversation today, the areas west of downtown down to the Y, the property to the east of downtown, and in this case on one side of the street, is the gas station. There is one building beyond that, which appears, at least, and I'd love to get some official clarification, because as I understand it, the school district is taking a position based upon their interpretation of state law, which may or may not be what everyone believes, is they can do whatever they want on that property, and we, the Planning Commission, and you, the city, really can't opine on what goes in there. And it seems to me that will be counterproductive to creating an end to the city park of the part of our property, and it can offer an opportunity to create a cap on the east end as the theater and hotel are beginning to develop into the cap of downtown west. And I don't know how we drag them into a conversation which deals with their need, which is to generate income to run a school system and have highest and best use for that property, and our interest in creating a coherent downtown. And as I understand it, what we use, they use as a planning firm was actually not a planning firm, and talking about expertise that you can go and buy in the system, getting a good planning firm that can help you figure that out and help you run process on all of that. And I just think we ought to be looking for ways to work with the school system on coming up with a plan.
I can tell you, we are actively working with them.
Great.
And really, I see it as a really wonderful opportunity for our partnership to build something that is good for them and good for the city. So more to come. It's in the early days that we are jointly meeting, but that's my intention, is we build something that meets their needs, but something that meets many needs. So
Are you working with a firm, a planning?
First, we're working with them, but go ahead.
If I can jump in to add to the mayor's comments on that one. So we are at the staff level having conversations with the school district, and there's an item coming to the July 8th city council meeting about setting up a formal process for 2 council members to meet with 2 school board members and continue the conversations in a formal, more structured manner. The school board hasn't taken a definitive position on the extent of their power, nor has the city. I know there's been a lot of conversations, but nobody's put anything definitive yet. And we, of course, as the city, reserve all rights and all abilities to object to anything that the council finds objectionable. But we are very much at the staff level starting the conversations on working together to see what can be achieved. And as the mayor noted, that'll be coming back to the council, presently scheduled July 8th.
So I just wanted to ask, if we do indeed do this RFP, a parking transportation RFP, I'd like to not just get the ideas on where parking lots could be or how cars could be managed, but what happens afterwards when they are indeed managed, so that transportation within the city, to encourage people to park their cars, they need a way in which to understand how to move about the city. So I'd like to include that as well, to get people out of their cars, and then what do they do? They park their car here. How do they move through the city? What is the plan for that? Because I think that's also very important. So not just where they park their cars, but what they do afterwards, what kind of transportation modes we might make available, whether it's the trolley, whatever it happens to be, and to start thinking about, how we want to move forward once we have an idea where the cars stop or leave or whatever.
That's good.
Okay. All right, so let's move on to fire hardening, firewise communities, and what we can do as a planning commission. Some of the concepts, for example, undergrounding, overhead utilities, things like that. Lucas, did you want to elaborate a little bit?
Could I, before
Yes,
you
go
do
on.
that? We only have 10 minutes
Yeah, we do.
left. This is a huge subject.
It is. Well,
It's
we're
an
not gonna tackle
important subject. And I don't know if we want to give an introduction to it and then have to redo it at another
Well,
meeting.
what I would like to do is get a little feedback from council that this is something that they want us to look at. Because if they say, no, we got it, we don't need you to look at it, then we won't pay any more attention. But it is something that we can look at as a planning commission, where we can potentially look at baking some of these into our current code. How do we deal with current projects when they come before us? Are they meeting all the design, are they meeting all of the fire requirements that are, provided by the state, provided by the insurance industry, example, and also to look at, do you want us to look at potentially how we can, for future projects, should they be required to underground their utilities?
I see.
Absolutely. But in 10 minutes, I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's again, just looking for guidance on, is this something that they want us to do?
That's what I wanted to propose, is let's have another meeting like this, not wait next year, but do it when we can reasonably do it and go to the other subjects. But I can respond quickly to one thing you said, which is one of the goals that we have is this fire safety and mitigation.
Awesome.
So we've come up with, I think, 9 items there, many of the things that are here. So on the fire hardening, I do think there's going to be a role for what our building ordinances will turn out to be, or what we're going to do, as was brought up by Ms. Roth.
Yeah.
And as you saw, there's vendors that are proposing to help us with that. So you're going to hear some of that later tonight. On the undergrounding, there is a meeting with Southern California Edison next month to ask, what funding is available, and the county's involved in that meeting to ask, could we start thinking about a project? And there was 2 community volunteers that helped with Northern California undergrounding, and that's like a 12-year process. It's not like it's a lot of money, and they've offered their services to us, volunteers, to say, let us help you start this project, and that made it to one of our top priorities too.
Okay.
So I would sort of see it as short, medium, and long. Short is, your landscaping, your house, what could be done. Medium is more infrastructure changes, and long is undergrounding, and that's very expensive, but we should start it now. So I don't want to say we've got it. What I want to say is a lot more is going to come in the next month on those subjects.
Okay.
Which I think we are going to come down to. But I
Mr.
want to hear from others.
Mr. Gill, Mr. Trent, I think that undergrounding needs to be pulled out of the issue of fire hardening, although clearly it performs some function in that, and in some areas more than others. And we know that Southern California has invested an enormous amount of money to harden their above surface infrastructure.
They've done that.
But burying utilities, I am now living in town in a rental up on Ventura and north of and guess what? The power poles are right in the middle of what the sidewalk should be.
Right.
And so the complete streets project in the core of the village is really being thwarted by the fact that all of our electrical and soon to be all of our fiber, but our cable and that kind of stuff is strung up above as opposed to put in the streets.
Just a quick note.
Excuse me?
Just a quick note, we're gonna put that fiber in the ground. Just an
The
FYI.
fiber will go underground.
Yeah, the
Right.
fiber will go in.
But your point's still the same.
That's my
same.
point. But it's these poles that carry these things which interfere with. The city was designed and built before we were dealing with an electric grid in the town, and so they plunk the poles down in these areas, and some of it's private property and some of it's public, but it's a mess. And it's one of the reasons to do this. It's not just fire. It also is, if you look at our design interrogations of people who are bringing projects in, we ask them, because it's in our field of purview, that are you blocking the beautiful views around town? Well, you sit in most people's backyards and you're looking at a forest of telephone poles and wires,
Right.
which are blocking the views. So it's part of our whole view shed and city beautiful issue. So it's got fire safety, it's got complete streets and pedestrian safety, because you have to walk out in the streets in the core of the town. And it is also about making more rugged our electrical system. So even if there's a fire, we don't have to shut the whole town down, the electricity in the whole town.
Everything you're saying is good.
So, but it's not just fire, is my
Understood.
point. And so
Fair enough.
I see it as something it should not be. Well, when we get to fire, we'll talk about that.
I just mean to say the priority, at least in my mind, is where the greatest risk is. It's not in the town. It's in the East End and it's in Upper Ojai, right? So my first thought is start east, head west, and that means the county. And so that's at least where the interest is going first. But that doesn't mean it won't continue. But that's at least the initial conversation.
I read through
Yeah.
the documents that you sent me from the CPUC on Rule 20. There's this state fund where local governments can work with their public utility or their utility provider to qualify for up to 100% of undergrounding, costs. And if you don't fall into that, there's like a second tier, right, where it's like 60%, and below that, there's another tier. And my thought there is, if we can partner with SoCal Edison on this and kind of align that with maybe the fiber that's going into town, that's a perfect opportunity to not have to rip up the streets one more time. I love your idea of working with the county and starting on the east and moving west. I think we need to work with them. But if we're unable to work with SoCal Edison on this, I personally would love to see us do what we did with Casitas Water Municipal District, bring that, into town, into like the whole, valley, and run that as a small public entity. In doing so,
That's an idea.
my only question is, would we then also qualify for Rule 20 funds? And so as you work with those volunteers, I'd be curious to know if we're actually precluding ourselves from working with them if we bring that in-house.
Those are all questions we have to ask.
And
yeah.
I'm seeing some shaking heads over there from, okay.
Well, there's so many questions. This
Yes.
is like so down the
Yeah.
road, but
I don't mean to be a dream squasher, but we actually don't have any funds in our Rule 20 account. So that'll be the starting point for the discussion with
Mhm.
Edison. So what's available to you is a Rule 20B or a Rule 20C, which end up being assessments, really. When I worked for Edison, I think it was $5 million a mile to underground. I'm sure it's probably twice that much now. And then the other challenge you have is you have to get cooperation from private property owners. So I don't really bank a lot on underground utility districts. They're a huge, giant expense. They're a big, long process. You could look for a small, tiny area you want to do, but you just will not find the appetite, I don't think, in this town to really do something very impactful.
I disagree. I think if you bring it in-house and you create your own
I'm
municipality, you can actually buy
this-
electricity in bulk, still sell it at the same rate.
We're debating about details
So
to be
I
explored.
worked
To
for
be
Edison
explored.
for 7 years, and one of my responsibilities was Rule 28 projects. So I'm
Sure.
coming from a place of experience and knowledge. I'm just presenting that based on my experience.
And I've thought about the economics, and I do have like a proposal for that.
But
Yeah.
my proposal was simply, let's research it and find out the scope, and that's it. And
So
then decide.
so the way it works is, a city council has to declare a district. That's the first step. And in general, they look for districts that are arterials because it's paid for by ratepayer dollars. And so they're not looking for a neighborhood. They're looking for an area that's going to be, the benefit's going to be derived by the community at large. That's usually where you start. But yes, we can have the discussion again with Edison, like you're talking about, Mayor. The other thing I want to mention is if the council gives us direction to bring in fiber into town, it's not going to be a joint trench opportunity because it's a micro trench. It's going to be 6 inches deep, and it's going to be curb side. So this is not a joint trench opportunity. But anyway, much more discussion on this if we want to do that.
And the only thing I'll add on the on the Rule 20 funds, Rule 20 funds only exist under the CPUC rules if we have an investor-owned utility under Edison. They do not exist for municipal utilities. Municipal utilities fund undergrounding other ways, and having that discussion is a much, much, much larger project, as we
Totally.
know with Casitas, that requires an entire eminent domain process, a massive amount of funding, winning several lawsuits, and a hell of a lot more analysis than we are doing right now.
And I think it's worth it.
Okay.
Well, and we'll figure it. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Let's-
I
give us
just
the last
wanted
word.
to, I wanted to ask Lucas or probably Lucas, if you could map to planning and building sort of the fire hardening kinds of things that we could do. So if we're going to actually look to strengthen the code and or solidify it, it'd be good to know where in advance where we might be able to do that. And it might be that, the Fire Safe Council is also someone that can help us understand that more.
It would really be in Title 9, which is their building.
It would be,
building code
that's what I thought,
regulations. And
yeah.
we're in the early stages of working with our building official to tease those pieces out, and he's mapping what he believes to be already existing kind of fire hardening pieces that are already in the books. So we're looking to create a list of those. So at least we've got a jumping off point.
Yeah,
and
that's
then
great.
build from there.
Yeah, and whatever planning, whatever is in
Planning would be like probably landscaping.
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, and that's important as well. Okay, thank you.
Think of planning more as like the Firewise communities,
Yeah.
defensible space,
Okay.
that sort of thing.
Thank you.
So that's what we could do on planning, if you want us to. If you don't want us to, it sounds like it's TBD, so we could do TBD.
Yeah, TBD, to be discussed, for sure.
I think it is for now.
Yeah, that's fine.
So my proposal is we stop.
Yeah.
And that we think
that's
of having
right on
another,
time.
and we have another meeting very soon.
Yeah, I think that's
If
good.
you guys are okay with that.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
Thank you all so
Wow, this
much.
is really
Yeah,
productive.
We covered a lot of ground.
fantastic.
Absolutely.
So we're gonna take a 10-minute break.
Good job.